Support for WUWM podcasts comes from Johnson Financial Group, helping customers build financial plans around their unique goals for over 55 years. More at johnsonfinancialgroup.com. Johnson Bank and Johnson Wealth Inc. are Johnson Financial Group companies.
From 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR, this is Lake Effect. I'm Excurette Nunez. Today we'll tell you about a program that helps get early education teachers into affordable housing in Milwaukee.
We gotta take care of the people that take care of our kids. And so if we do that, we are one step closer to achieving that higher quality of life for our entire community.
Wisconsin's most popular state park is getting bigger. We'll tell you how.
It's a great example of a public and nonprofit partnership that led to this acquisition. It really shows how partnerships can really work for the public's benefit.
Plus, sturgeon have returned to the Milwaukee River for the first time in 100 years. We'll tell you how that's possible coming up on Lake Effect. This is Lake Effect from 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Excurette Nunez. Thanks for joining us today. WUWM has been addressing barriers to home ownership in Milwaukee and the possible solutions in our series, Keys to Home Ownership. One local program is working to make housing more affordable for early childhood educators. Salaries for these teachers can range from $35,000 to about $70,000 a year. Because of this and the inflated housing market, owning a home can be extremely difficult for early educators. That's why the Community Development Alliance created the Early Childhood Education Homes program. It aims to improve housing security as well as recruitment and retention of early childhood educators. To learn more about the program, Lake Effect's Audrey Nowakowski is joined by Teague Whaley-Smith with the Community Development Alliance. He starts by sharing the obstacles many early educators face.
I think everybody sees the dramatic effect that housing costs have had across the country, and particularly in great communities here like Milwaukee. And when that happens, when you have a shortage of housing and you have increased demand, the price goes up, and prices have skyrocketed, particularly in the area of rent. We've seen rent, almost go up, 30, 40%, sometimes year by year. So that has a big impact on lower wage earners. And we know that there are so many passionate teachers and early childhood educators that love their careers and want to be working with kids their entire lives. And then all of a sudden their budget changes because they're spending 2 or 3 times more on housing, and they have to make really painful decisions. Do they want to continue in the career that they love and that they've chose, or do they want to be able to house their family? And nobody should have to make that choice.
Right. And the Wisconsin Policy Forum reported that there was almost 10% of teachers that dropped out of the profession entirely. And financial stability is one of the reasons among the many other stressors that teachers face. So when we're talking about how do we weigh rent, mortgage, and the salary of these professionals, what is the average salary of a teacher in Milwaukee compared to the cost of affording a mortgage?
So there's a wide variety of that term teacher.
Yeah.
I grew up in a in-home early childhood education facility. My father was what many would call a daycare provider. And salaries for people that are doing this independently in their own homes, or those people that are working and in that classroom with 0 to 3-month-olds, wages can be as low as $14, $15 an hour for some of those folks. You multiply that by 2,000 hours a year and you get to, a salary that's around $30,000. Of course, it can go up from there depending on your experience and what school system you're in, et cetera. But the general principle is that we don't want families spending more than 1/3 of their income on housing, because if they do, they can't afford other quality of life amenities or necessities, including food and clothing and all of those other type of things that people need to spend money on. So if you're at $30,000 a year, what you can afford is about a $100,000 home. And there are very few $100,000 homes on the market in Milwaukee.
In livable shape.
That's right. The ones
Yes.
that you find actually require $100,000 or $200,000 of repair. So our goal was to really get to that price point, and we were able to hit a price point of about $105,000 for each of these homes. so that you have people that are moving from paying $1,200, $1,300 a month in rent into a home of about $900 a month for mortgage and interest.
Yeah, let's get into this program you're talking about and how you kind of came to third of the income category for helping you guys price out this program. So it is the Early Childhood Education Homes program, and it's aiming to help tackle the problem of housing security for educators of all levels. Before we get into some of the specifics, can you share how it first started, and was it modeled after an existing program, either other places in the U.S. or something you wanted to try here in Milwaukee?
So post-COVID, there were several working teams working on different elements of quality of life in Milwaukee, whether it's food security or otherwise. And there's a group working on early child education that noticed that teachers weren't coming back into the classroom after COVID. And if early childhood education teachers were not able to get to the classroom, then that means that we as parents could not get into work because we don't have a place to send our kids. So this is a problem bigger than just the teachers. It's a societal problem that requires societal answers. Initially, the group that was working on this included Nextdoor Foundation, COA, Malika, UCC, Rooted and Rising, and they wanted to work on secure housing. And initially, they only thought rental was possible. And we said, we actually think that if we're serious about long-term stability, we need to focus on homeownership. Rents in Wisconsin, if they just increased by inflation, since the 1950s and 60s, we'd only have about $800 a month in rent. Of course, rents are now averaging $1,200, $1,300 a month. Your mortgage payment stays the same. And so we wanted a home ownership solution. So we partnered with those groups. We partnered with LISC, the Local Initiative Support Corporation. We were able to receive a $5 million grant from the Evers administration for innovation in Department of Workforce Development. Housing is a workforce problem, and it is a workforce solution. So that's how this idea first came about.
Now, when it comes to finding properties, is it a mix of finding ones that can be rehabbed? Are you building from scratch? How are you acquiring the houses that will be used for this program?
So anytime you want to scale something up, you need to have systems. And the problem with rehab is that every rehab is different. Sometimes you need to replace the flooring. Sometimes it's the ceiling. Sometimes it's the roof. Sometimes it's the basement. And we need to preserve as many homes as possible, but it's hard to bring that to scale. However, if you're building new construction housing, you can bring that to scale by building several of the same model of housing that brings costs down for everybody. And we have an incredible opportunity here in Milwaukee that we have 3,000 vacant lots, all of which at one point had a homeowner in a neighborhood. And in the 1960s, those homes got transferred over to one landlord, and then there was a second generation and a fourth generation, and now we're like on a seventh generation landlord, each one of them depleting the property of rent and not making an investment, to the point where those eighth, ninth generation landlords, their entire strategy is to buy it with cash, not provide insurance, not pay the taxes, wait for it to be tax foreclosed, and then it's inhabitable and needs to be demolished by the city. And we can repopulate these neighborhoods and bring people back to the neighborhoods that they may have grown up in by building new construction housing on those vacant lots.
So when it comes to all that coordination it takes to acquire the lots and then also, more importantly, build, what kind of partnerships do you have with the city or other businesses or organizations to make these houses?
Housing is at the core of all of our quality of life. Data shows that it impacts education, safety in neighborhoods, employment rates, and overall health. The way you get to that goal of healthy housing is through collective impact. So at the Community Development Alliance, we bring partners together. We don't swing the hammers. We don't provide the direct assistance, but we're sort of quarterback or coach in this example, bringing in all of the teammates necessary to get the projects across the finish line. So that involves funders and philanthropy, and we've had great philanthropy on these efforts, including not only LISC itself and Department of Workforce Development, Wells Fargo, Northwestern Mutual, Zilber Family Foundation, Greater Milwaukee Foundation. All these partners come together to fund the project. But then you need neighborhood organizations to give direction on what type of housing they want in the neighborhoods. And so we have a resident advisory council, and we set up a project team with neighbors that we're building in so that they have input on what homes look like, the deed restrictions that are put on them. They help draft those things. And then you bring in the builders. And so we're very fortunate to have Habitat for Humanity has partnered with Envision Growth and OB and Mabuzer to build homes. VIA CDC is building homes. MCC is building homes. And it's just been an incredible partnership of so many partners to come together. And then, of course, educators need to know about the homes. So we've had partnerships with brokers like Don and Colbert that were featured in a recent article, and the early childhood centers themselves to be able to come to the holiday parties to talk about it, to come to the teacher retreats to talk about it. So it really does take a village to build a house.
Absolutely. You mentioned these houses are sold for about $105,000. What's the average cost to get these homes up and ready to sell?
Yeah, so when my grandfather first built his home in the 1950s, it cost about $12,000 to build a single-family home, and the average annual salary was about $6,000. So in our country's history, we've figured out how to build a home for 2 years of the average salary for a lot of Americans. But unfortunately, Americans that look like me, white Americans, white families, and built intergenerational wealth. If we had just seen inflation in those costs, similar to we talked about rents, a new home would only cost $100,000 to build, and you wouldn't have this gap. But that's not what has happened in the construction industry. The construction industry has lost the ability to build entry-level homes. They're focused on these very large McMansions, and it doesn't make business sense for somebody to build an entry-level home from beginning to end without massive federal intervention. And so one of the things that we are piloting here is to really illustrate when you do have government intervention what you can do. And so it can cost anywhere between $250,000 to $300,000 to build these homes. It's a really big gap. But you have to understand that a home lasts for 100, 200 years. So it's really 20 families that you're serving over time rather than one. But what's really important is that, I can't afford my grandfather's home. My kids can't afford my grandfather's home. We had this massive federal subsidy in the 1950s and 60s that went to wealth generation for one generation. And then the kids and the grandkids were left on their own, and we've seen that. And so we have a process called Forever Affordable that allows the first family to build equity in the home, but also ensures that that home is sold as an affordable price for future generations.
I'm just going to take a moment to reintroduce you. I'm Lake Effect's Audrey Nowakowski, speaking with Teague Whaley-Smith of the Community Development Alliance Early Childhood Education Homes Program. So we're talking about the homes and the need that they're filling, but for someone who's a teacher or early educator out there, how do they qualify? How do they learn about the program, and what are the steps to then get them approved?
So we've tried to make the process as simple as possible, but also achievable so that people aren't given false hope. And so the way that the process works is that any educator can go to housingplan.org/ECE, and there is an application process there. And the basic requirement is that you go through homebuyer counseling, because we want to make sure people know what they're getting into. And you have to have a pre-approval letter for about $95,000 to $100,000. Most families get down payment assistance, and that gets taken away from the mortgage that you need. And so that's really all that they need to do in addition to being an early childhood educator. So the money that we raised is for third grade teachers and below. So you have to be actively working for an early childhood education that include public schools, charter schools, independent practitioners that have a home child center. So that's what you need to qualify, but then you also need to go through homebuyer counseling and get that pre-approval letter from a lender.
With this program, the Community Development Alliance sold its first early childhood education home in October of 2024. How many teachers has this program helped so far? Where are you at now?
We're about halfway through. So there are about 20 educators that are in homes right now, and we have another 20 that are hitting the market right now. And there are homes available. We actively want as many educators to take advantage of this opportunity as possible.
What kind of feedback have you heard from the teachers you've housed so far?
It's really been incredible to meet the families that have gotten into these homes and what it has done for them. We have people that have moved from major housing insecurity into a stable homeownership opportunity going forward. And it's less about, what they say, and it's more about the smile on their face. I mean, you can tell when somebody is stressed out about anything, but you can particularly tell when somebody's stressed out about housing. I don't have the patience and tenacity to be in a classroom with 20 kids, and the people that do are really, really special individuals, and we need to make their job as easy as possible. And so if we can take out the stress of housing insecurity, that's what we should all be doing.
It's a major, major factor. You mentioned it'll be about 40 houses total. What kind of growth do you hope to achieve beyond that? Are there plans for more?
So our ability to continue this program requires, major financial resources over multiple generations to do this. And so I think we've illustrated and proven the concept, and now we need the federal government, state government, and other larger government to really step in. The city and the county can't do this by themselves. And so housing has always been a public good. We've known it's been a public good. Again, I mentioned my grandfather. He received major assistance through loan guarantees and the infrastructure that was built to build his home. And we need that same kind of investment. If you look at the federal budget, there's about $200 billion each year spent on housing, and less than 1% is spent on home ownership for the average American. And so we really need to live our values. And if we believe in the American dream, we have to have people step up and say, you know what, this project works. This is a good public investment to go forward. Our goal is to be building 100 homes per year throughout the city. Not all of them will be for educators, but we always hope that a portion of them will be available for educators and other really critical workforce in our communities.
Right, because with 3,000 vacant lots, the possibilities are there, but would you say the main limitations would be the funding and how that looks?
Yeah, the main limitation is funding. So the primary limitation getting to funding is, do we as Americans, do we as Wisconsinites, do we consider housing to be a public good? And if we're serious about that, we need to move away from rental and back to home ownership strategies. There will always be a role for rental. If you look at successful communities, there's about 30% of people that rent, and we should focus on that. But in some of the communities that we're building in, it's 100% rental. There are blocks in the city of Milwaukee that were built for homeowners and home ownership that now have been 100% turned over to landlords. And they're just extracting capital from our neighborhoods. And so we need to say, enough is enough. These homes are for homeowners, and that can be done through policy change. And you see that throughout the country of saying that big corporations can't own, single-family homes. And it's also going to take a public investment. But just to be very clear, that public investment cannot be done by local government by itself. It's going to require the state and federal government to step in.
You're talking about the wider impact of homeownership in communities. And as we're talking specifically about housing for educators, how does it benefit not just them, that this is no longer a major stressor, but their students, wider communities? How is this program making waves and benefiting more than the person who's setting foot in the home?
So there's really great data about the link between homeownership and education. If there are families in stable housing, those families and their kids have 30% higher educational outcomes. That's a major number that we should be conscious of for those working in education otherwise. And the reason is that you constantly have kids that are in families who can afford the first month's rent, maybe the security deposit, but then that's it. And so they're there for a month or two, and then they get evicted. And your teachers talk about this 6-month cycle in the classroom that kids can't focus and they can't stay at work. There's data that also shows the same is true for people that work and for the teachers that are in there. If they are having housing insecurity and they're on that 6-month cycle, how can they possibly focus on the kids in the classroom? And so this is kind of similar of getting on an airplane and that oxygen bag falls down and says, take care of yourself before you help others. We got to take care of the people that take care of our kids. And so if we do that, we are one step closer to achieving that higher quality of life for our entire community.
Well, Teague, I want to thank you so much for joining me today to share more about the Early Childhood Education Homes program. It's great work, and I can't wait to see how it grows.
Thank you so much.
Teague Whaley-Smith is the Chief Alliance Executive of the Community Development Alliance. He spoke with Lake Effect's Audrey Nowakowski. You can find more information and how to apply for the program at wuwm.com. Support for the Seeking Solutions Keys to Home Ownership series comes from presenting sponsor Educators Credit Union. You can find all of the stories in this series at wuwm.com/housing. Devil's Lake State Park is the most visited park in the state, and soon visitors will have more to explore. We'll tell you all about the park's expansion in about 15 minutes. But first, we'll tell you about a new study that looks at how Wisconsin women are doing in areas like health and economic security. That's coming up on Lake Effect on Milwaukee's NPR. You're listening to Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM. I'm Xcaret Nunez. The Women's Fund of Greater Milwaukee recently released the Women's Wellbeing Index. This report provides a look at how women are doing in areas like safety, health, economic security, education, and more. The study was done in collaboration with the Center for Community and Nonprofit Studies at UW-Madison. To help break down the data, Lake Effect's Audrey Nowakowski is joined by Mary Beth Collins, the executive director of the center.
Let's start with some of the more positive findings. What areas are we doing well in at the state level?
So one really notable trend that we see in Wisconsin, and this does track a national trend, is that women are becoming more educated. They both hold higher levels of education when you break down the percentages of levels of education than in past eras. And they are also, in many cases, exceeding the same categories for men. Another important thing to note is that women in Wisconsin have a pretty high participation rate in the workforce, which can be viewed as really good. But we also see that paired with some concerning data about the wage gap that persists and unfortunately in recent years has even become wider, actually, which was a little shocking to see in the data.
Yeah, the data shows that this gap has persisted and gotten worse since 2016, especially here in Milwaukee, but also statewide. What do you think are some of the reasons contributing to this?
So this is where some of the input from our other sources kind of comes in. There are three major phenomena that I think people cite for the wage gap in a lot of contexts, and I think they're certainly worth interrogating in Milwaukee and in Wisconsin. So one is just the notion that I think a lot of people would jump to right away, which is perhaps women doing equal work to men are just making 80 cents on the dollar. And this trend is something that's been tracked in the United States in general. And I'll give you some specific statistics on this. Across the United States in the report period, women earned 82 cents for every $1 that a man earns as a national statistic. In 2021, women earned 89.4 cents for every dollar that men earned in Wisconsin. So a smaller wage gap than the United States average. But the problematic piece is that actually decreased to go lower than the national average in years since 2021. So there is the notion that I think a lot of people would jump to, which is this is just discrimination. There are two other phenomena, though, that people talk about that are cited in some of the reporting that we did. One is that a lot of times women are working, there's a sort of heavier concentration of women in the helping professions is sometimes how we refer to it, or other low wage professions. And so, if you look at fields that are very worthy of good pay, such as early childhood care or service industry type of work, or other helping professions in human services and things like that, or even teaching, those tend to be professions where there's a higher concentration of women fulfilling those roles. And whether that's because the work has been devalued or however you want to explain the lower wages in those sectors are noted to often have lower wages than other sectors. We see more parity when women are in jobs like the legal profession or media, where there's sort of not such an association with the field as being, quote, women's work, which is a theme that people talk about in some of these other professions. And the third phenomenon that people cite is that women are often kind of the default caregivers for extended and nuclear family needs. And so that can manifest in a lot of ways. That can relate to taking breaks from work when you're caring for a small child and, maybe taking a pause. And so then the resume sort of disruption or advancement might look a little different. But it can also relate to things like daily demands, like being the one that has to hurry for a family emergency away from work and being the default respondent, so to speak. And that can maybe affect perceptions of performance or other advancement opportunities.
On the note of more concerning figures, there are some more areas of top disparities for women that stood out to me looking at this. And one big one is health and safety.
Yeah. So one thing about women that is a bright spot is that women tend to carry health insurance at a higher rate than men. And I think a lot of the folks looking at this information would correlate that with the sense that in the lifespan of a woman, there are like well understood needs for healthcare along the way. And yet, with that coverage in mind, we do see that there are concerning statistics, very concerning statistics that have been cited for a long time in Wisconsin for maternal mortality rates. So the United States as a whole has the most problematic maternal mortality rates of any of the sort of global north developed countries. And that phenomenon is exacerbated when you look at women of non-Caucasian racial ethnicity. So just to put a finer point on it, Black, Hispanic, and Asian women, non-white women, Indigenous women represent 25% of the births in Wisconsin, but 50% of the maternal mortality rates. In some of the other health-related areas related to reproduction, you see something that I think most people would agree is probably a good thing, which is in terms of teenage birth rates, for example. Those have really gone down over the last couple of decades. And I think that across insurance coverage, as well as, services that are available across a lot of different sectors, you can really see the link between some of these statistics and where services might support better outcomes, and in some cases where services need to be looked at more carefully because we're not getting the kinds of outcomes that we want. Another thing that might just be of interest is that the birth rate in Wisconsin is generally decreasing. And that also tracks a phenomenon in the United States. Another thing with safety that does come up is that we know that sexual violence is a very specific concern when we talk about women in Wisconsin and otherwise. And there's an underreporting of this kind of violence, which means that there might be services missed. There's a lack of understanding of how prevalent the phenomenon might be. So you have a lot of reputable providers in that space indicating that they are concerned that there is underreporting of sexual violence, a phenomenon that tends to kind of affect women in a particular way. And I think it's fair to say more prevalently.
We're kind of going through main pointers of education, economics, health, safety, affordability. In your opinion, looking at the statewide numbers, what do you think is the overall state of Wisconsin women's well-being?
I think the way that I would characterize it is that some really important strides have been made in certain systems. So, for example, the rates of education, experts that reflected on that for our study really wanted to be clear that there were links between policies creating opportunities for women to enter higher education after, as we know, over the 150-year arc of that in Wisconsin, for example, it didn't start out that way, right? And so there have been strides made that are giving women opportunities for education and work and participation in ways that certainly are evolving over time, in many ways in positive directions. We also see, for example, in leadership in the public life, 31% of Wisconsin legislators are women, 29% of city council members across Wisconsin are women, and 24% of county board members are women, which of course is a huge improvement if you were to dial back 50 or 100 years. But it's still very much under pro rata population comparison, which would put us at closer to 50%. So I think that the story is that we have been moving in a direction of greater participation and access to participate in the ways that women want to participate in society. And we have not alleviated some of the challenges that face women in particular ways, such as gender-based violence, the entire role of maternity, and providing services for maternity. Some of the less identifiable or strictly gender-driven things that tend to come up more culturally, maybe with relation to gender, like who is the default caregiver in a family. And we certainly have not given proper respect to some of these professions that women tend to dominate that are paid less than other professions. And I also think that affirmative policies and programming to support women are needed to make sure that that arc that I'm referring to continues in the right direction. And I also just think that there needs to be a greater recognition, the fact that women are holding together so many of these roles across family spaces, professional spaces, public spaces, and community spaces. And if we don't support women in that, there's a lot of pillars of our communities that are not going to be there in the way that we need them to be there. And if anything, we need to like fortify and compensate those things even more and recognize them even more.
So looking at this data in all these different topics, how do you hope that this study on women's well-being can be a tool for action to address the disparities that are continuing to persist for women in the state of Wisconsin and locally here in Milwaukee?
Well, I'd like to believe that perhaps this information can be shared across sectors and that employers, for example, looking at the wage information, could make efforts to really reflect on their practices or their rates across employees and try to just address that directly. That's one thing that the data really does highlight. I think that advocacy for those helping professions is another thing that associations and groups can really work on. And I know some are, especially in early childhood, for example. I also think that community organizations, social service organizations, healthcare organizations need to continue the quest to ensure that access to services is as good as it possibly can be. And finally, I think organizations across civil society really thinking through how do we encourage women to be in roles of leadership in the public sector, in all professions, and support them when we know that there are still some challenges in them being able to access those opportunities and be in those opportunities with these other responsibilities that I've referred to. Any representative of any organization, whether it be a business or a civil society organization or a local government, could really look at this data and ask themselves the questions of like, where in this do we see ourselves? And how could we make sure that we're examining whether we're contributing to those disparities or contributing to the more positive trends? And what can we be doing better and more?
Well, Mary Beth, I want to thank you so much for joining me today on Lake Effect to dive into the Women's Wellbeing Index.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Mary Beth Collins is the executive director of the Center for Community and Nonprofit Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She spoke with Lake Effect's Audrey Nowakowski. Devil's Lake State Park just got 100 acres bigger. The Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources finalized a deal last week to protect what used to be a large plot of privately owned land. The acquisition came through a partnership with the Knowles Nelson Stewardship Program. WUWM's Eric Vonfellow Maria Peralta Ariano is joined by Andrew Hansen III, the partnership's liaison for the Wisconsin DNR, to learn more about the park's expansion.
Can you just explain what the process was that led to this moment and this deal?
Sure. Great question. This is a little more complicated than some of them because this property was put up for sale at an auction. And that's not something the DNR is able to respond to. And so a nonprofit partner, the name of the Conservation Fund, which is a national nonprofit conservation organization that acquires land, at-risk lands, and will hold them for other partners to then acquire. And the Conservation Fund was able to raise most, at least, of the private money needed for them to be well positioned at auction to successfully acquire the property. And then they did some site remediation on the property, removed some buildings that were in a state of decay, and held it until the DNR was able to go through its process, which includes a number of levels of staff, professional staff approvals, appraisal by a professional independent appraiser, approval by the governor eventually, and approval by our Natural Resources Board. And then, yes, we successfully acquired the property.
And who previously owned this land, and what was the decision to put it up for auction?
I know it's been a family farm for many years, but I think you'd probably have to ask the Conservation Fund It has not been actively farmed by the family in recent years, where the land had been rented to a neighbor, and much of the property has a lot of rocky terrain on it and is forested. And so it's not like this is prime ag land, 100 acres that is being removed from agriculture or anything like that.
For sure. And the foundation that helped you guys acquire this piece of land, they make it a point to acquire parcels of land that are high risk and of high conservation value. So what does that mean for this piece of land? What makes it high risk and high conservation value?
Well, this property is in a part of the state that's seeing a lot of development pressure, even in the rural areas. There's a lot of homes being built in the countryside of this part of Sauk County, and this is part of what's called the Baraboo Hills. And this is designated a national natural landmark by the National Park Service. It's also part of the Baraboo Hills State Recreation Area and Devil's Lake State Park. It also has a couple of other designations, part of the Ice Age National Scientific Reserve and hoped for future route of the Ice Age Trail. The Baraboo Hills are known primarily for the 1.6 billion with a B-year-old bedrock, the quartzite. Also for the dense forests. It is the largest block of interior forests in southern Wisconsin. And so it is great habitat for nesting songbirds.
It's going to be great to see this area come to life and really add itself to the state park and the way that we're able to enjoy this piece of land. And as you mentioned, there are plans to continue the Ice Age Trail through this expansion, among other things. So what kind of work is needed to complete these goals, and what else are you guys planning for this parcel of 100 acres?
Sure. Well, first and foremost is we need to complete a master plan for Devil's Lake State Park, and we're in the process of doing that. It's really a timely acquisition because we are partway through the master planning process. And in that process, we outline the goals for management and recreational uses of the property for the future. And the public will have at least a couple of opportunities for providing comments on how we think the property should be managed, and the public has a chance then to help influence how the property is used and managed in the future. Once that's in place, then we expect that there would probably be some trails on the property, perhaps or likely the Ice Age Trail would be included in those, as well as how we might manage the fallow fields, perhaps for prairie and some open-grown oaks there that need some management, and then interior oak forests and other parts of the property.
Beautiful. And what does this mean for the future of conservation in Wisconsin? Is it a marker for anything larger, or just what does this mean in terms of opportunity for us?
Well, I think it's a great example of public and nonprofit partnership that led to this acquisition. It really shows how partnerships can really work for the public's benefit and leverage public dollars here. In this case, the Knowles Nelson Stewardship Program can leverage private dollars in acquisitions. And unfortunately, the Knowles Nelson Stewardship Program is set to end in June. And that's just been a really integral program for conservation and the development of public lands for outdoor recreation opportunities in Wisconsin. And so this acquisition, I think, is really a highlight of that program and what the program can do when it's allowed to do so.
Lastly, I did want to ask, is there anything else that you would like to bring up or talk about in terms of this expansion, or things that you would like people to know ahead of time?
Well, one fun thing about this for me, just as sort of a side hobby interest in geology, is that this property has a glacial terminal moraine on it that's extremely unique. The portion of this terminal moraine is shaped like a hairpin, and it is due to the underlying topography being that quartzite that I mentioned, and demonstrates how the underlying topography can affect how glaciers flow. And it's really a fascinating thing. And it also happens to be at the top of that moraine, the second highest point in Sauk County. So the views are just outstanding.
Wonderful. Well, I can't wait to see just the future of this parcel of land and being able to also be a part of just determining what happens with it and being able to enjoy it. I think it's going to be a wonderful opportunity. It's just a wonderful step towards being able to conserve our lands.
I completely agree. And this is such a fabulous property. I'm so happy that we're going to have this available for the people of Wisconsin to use and enjoy.
Andrew Hansen III is the partnership's liaison for the Wisconsin DNR. He spoke with WUWM's Eric Vonfellow, Maria Peralta Ariano. Do you need some flexibility for when you listen to Lake Effect? Well, you can listen to us on demand. Find Lake Effect as a podcast wherever you like to listen, download it, and enjoy it on the go. Still to come, we'll tell you about the triumphant return of Sturgeon to the Milwaukee River. That's next on Lake Effect on Milwaukee's NPR. This is Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM. I'm Xcaret Nunez. Conservationists are celebrating the return of sturgeon to the Milwaukee River, 20 miles upstream from Lake Michigan. It's the first time one of the giant ancient fish was documented in Ozaukee County in more than 100 years. Sturgeon disappeared from the river because of things like overfishing and degraded habitat. The discovery of the sturgeon in Lake Michigan so far signals a milestone in a sturgeon restoration project that's been underway for 20 years. WUWM environmental reporter Susan Bentz is joined by Andrew Struck, the director of planning and parks in Ozaukee County. He begins by describing the cameras that captured the sturgeon's historic journey.
The camera is immediately below us here at this culvert. And then we also have a overhead camera that you can see the actual fishway. But the underwater camera is in this culvert, and it's a kind of a pinch point for all migrating fish that are coming up the Milwaukee River. And then when they hit the Thiensville-Mequon Dam, they find their way over to our Nature Lake Fishway here and come through the fishway, and they have to pass through this culvert that we're standing on. So it's a little bit of a pinch point. Every single fish that comes past this point on the Milwaukee River has to pass through this culvert, and so we can get a really good count and image of those fish that are passing through.
Normally, this time of year, what might be passing through?
Some of the first runs are non-native fish, but sport fish, so some of the trout species, Chinook and steelhead and even rainbow trout are some of the first game fish that come kind of migrating, but we will start to see some of our other native fish now starting to migrate up. That means northern pike.
But what was special about March 30th?
March 30th was very special, really a historic day for a historic journey. We had the first adult male lake sturgeon come up from Lake Michigan and make it through the fishway here at Thiensville-Mequon, up past the fishway and past the dam for the first time in probably over 100 years. The sturgeon are back.
It is incredible because there's the restoration in and of itself and the fact that it's hooray.
Yes.
It's working.
It's working.
But it's also working because of the pathway that's been made to be more natural coming up from Lake Michigan to this spot.
Absolutely.
North Avenue Dam.
Yes. Yeah, we've so many partners, so much effort over, frankly, 2 decades. So making that passage, that journey possible, North Avenue Dam, Kletch Dam, Estabrook Dam, in Milwaukee County, those efforts. And then our efforts here at Thiensville-Mequon Dam with the fishway that was constructed in 2009 and 10, and then reconstructed with the idea of making it even more suitable for passage by lake sturgeon. And
it worked.
There was a question, but now we have absolute confirmation that lake sturgeon can make it all the way up. And so they will be able to make it up here to Ozaukee County and hopefully find, their native spawning grounds.
So what made it more suitable, more inviting for sturgeon?
Well, I think first of all was the reintroduction itself. So bringing sturgeon back to the Milwaukee River has been a two-plus decade process.
Coordinated primarily through River Edge Nature Center and the DNR?
That's correct. Yes, DNR and River Edge Nature Center established back in 2006-ish, established a streamside rearing for lake sturgeon.
Their own little trailer.
Their own little hatchery. And why is that important? Because sturgeon, like a lot of our other native fish, are attracted to the chemical composition of the water where they were born. And so they have an olfactory sense, if you will, a native sense for the water, the chemical makeup of the water where they were born, and have a natural strong instinct to get back to that same tributary. And so the streamside rearing used Milwaukee River and the natural chemicals in the rearing trailer. So they actually would take Milwaukee River and pump it through the streamside rearing station or trailer to raise the fish. So they had that chemical imprint on them when they were reintroduced. So over the last 20 years or so, the DNR, River Edge, and many, many other volunteers have been not only rearing but then stocking the sturgeon back as part of Sturgeon Fest.
They're about to hit their 20th anniversary, right?
They're about to hit their 20th anniversary, and what better way to celebrate? Absolutely.
So just to clarify, when you say chemicals, you're not meaning that chemicals are being added. You're saying it's the
the natural
profile of that water.
Yeah, the natural water's chemistry, from the natural water. And so again, we just see a little mink coming into the fishway.
What I want to see.
He's hunting.
So what I want to see is a sturgeon.
Yes.
We can't leave until we see a sturgeon.
I'll have to show you on the video. You won't be able to see it from the top side, but you can see it on ozaukefishway.org. You can see the underwater camera, and there is a clip of the first male sturgeon, 50 plus inches long, passing through the fishway here at Thiensville-Mequon Dam. Yes.
So tell us who that sturgeon was and more about it.
Very good point. So in addition to the underwater camera, we actually have what are called pit tag readers, passive integrated transponding readers. So each lake sturgeon, when they're reared, they get a little tag. It's very similar to the tag that's put in our pets that you can read with a chip reader. And each one of the sturgeon, when they're reared, gets a pit tag. And then we have pit tag readers all along the Milwaukee River now, but one of the first ones was put in here at Thiensville-Mequon that lays in the bottom of the fishway and can detect that when they swim over it. So they can detect that chip. That chip has a unique ID number, and so we know that unique fish, and we can tell when it was stocked. In this case, that male was stocked in 2011, right here at Thiensville-Mequon in Thiensville Park. And so, 15-year-old male, mature and coming up. And, the unique thing about sturgeon is they take a while to get to sexual maturity. So 15 years is probably on the early end of that. So very, very positive sign. That would be
He's raring to go.
He's raring to go. That would be the first, the sign that we would see the males coming back. And the females take a little bit longer to hit sexual maturity. So unfortunately, he may be making this journey and not find a partner, but we're hopeful that maybe there are also some female sturgeons coming up. But generally speaking, we know that the females take a little bit longer to make their journey.
So how much further upstream can they travel at this point?
So we're at roughly river mile 20, I believe, here at the Thiensville Dam, and they can go up to the Bridge Street Dam in the village of Grafton. So I believe that is right around river mile 30 or so. So that's the mileage from Lake Michigan. So up to the village of Grafton.
So they can't quite make it up to River Edge.
They can't make it back to River Edge, but they do have that same sense of the water.
That sense of home.
That sense of home. And a whole host of partners, again, have contributed to this success over 2 decades. But one thing that we're very hopeful for is actually now being able to have successful spawning habitat for those sturgeon. And one of our other projects here in Ozaukee County was the removal of the lime kiln dam in the village of Grafton, which is accessible, so they can get up to that area. And what makes that special for spawning sturgeon is It's fractured bedrock in that reach of the Milwaukee River, and it's got higher velocities, but not too high. And so we believe, yet to be confirmed, but we believe that might be really ideal sturgeon spawning habitat in that reach by lime kiln. And what made that possible was the dam removal that we did there in 2011-12.
I was going to say that was a while ago.
It was a while ago. So all of these steps have been leading up to the day.
That was WUWM environmental reporter Susan Bentz speaking with Andrew Struck, the Planning and Parks Director for Ozaukee County. That's Lake Effect for today. I'm Xcaret Nunez. Audrey Nowakowski, Joy Powers, and Sam Woods join me in producing Lake Effect each week, with help from Graham Thomas. WUWM Eric Vonfellow, Maria Peralta Ariano is also helping out Lake Effect this week. Becky Mortensen is our executive producer, and Emily Files helps edit the show. She also contributed to our election coverage this week. We also heard from Mayan Silver, Jimmy Gutierrez, and Susan Bentz from the WUWM news team this week. Jason Reevy is our studio engineer, Valeria Navarro Villegas is our digital operations manager, and Trevor Shep wrote our theme music. If you missed any of Lake Effect this week, you can find all of our conversations at WUWM.com. And if you'd like to take the show on the go, you can download the Lake Effect podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks so much for joining us today on listener-supported 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR.